Nobody in Millhaven Crossing forgot the afternoon. Cole Dressler pulled a stranger's broken-down wagon out of the ditch on the South Road, and then spent the next 4 months trying to convince himself it had meant nothing. It wasn't the act itself. Cole had pulled wagons out of ditches before. He was the kind of man the road called upon when it wanted something moved, something fixed, something handled without complaint. That was what you did when you had broad shoulders and a reputation for showing up. You showed up. You did the thing. You went home. What he had not done before was stand in the rain afterward, while a woman with mud on her coat and a very straight back looked at the wagon wheel he had just repaired and said, quietly, almost to herself, that she had almost had it. Like the rain and the ditch and the broken wheel were simply a problem she had been in the process of solving when he had interrupted. He thought about that for a long time. The almost Cole Dressler was 43 years old and had lived in Millhaven Crossing his entire life, which meant the town had grown up around him the way trees grow around a fence post, incorporating him, working past him, occasionally leaning on him. He ran the livery stable at the east end of the main road, and he ran it the way he ran everything, efficiently, without excess, with the particular thoroughness of a man who had decided long ago that if you were going to do a thing, you were going to do it correctly. He had been married once, briefly, in his late 20s, to a woman who had left after 2 years and told him on her way out that living with him was like living next to a mountain. Impressive, she had said, but not warm. He had not disagreed with her. He had gone back to work the following morning. The South Road ran through a narrow pass between 2 ridges before it opened into Millhaven's valley, and in autumn it had a way of turning treacherous before you realized it was happening. The rain that Tuesday had started as mist and become something much more serious within an hour. Cole was driving back from the Carver property with an empty cart when he saw the wagon listing badly into the ditch on the left side, one rear wheel cracked clean through, and a woman standing beside it in the rain. She was not panicking. That was the first thing he noticed. She had a length of rope in her hands and had been, apparently, attempting some kind of improvised repair. She looked up when he pulled to a stop, and her expression was not the expression of someone waiting to be saved. It was the expression of someone who was calculating whether this new development was going to help or complicate matters. "Can I assist?" he asked. She looked at him. She looked at his cart, his horse, the heavy rope coiled behind his seat. She appeared to perform a rapid and thorough assessment. "Yes," she said, "I think you can." Her name did not come until later, not until after he had rigged the rope and pulled the wagon free and replaced the broken wheel with the spare she had, sensibly, stored beneath the cart's false floor. Not until after she had worked beside him in the rain without being asked, handing him tools, holding the axle steady, saying nothing unnecessary. Her name was Iris Calloway. She said it matter-of-factly, the way people say things when they are used to moving through places where no one knows them, when their name is simply information and not an introduction. She was passing through on her way north, she said. She had a letter to deliver in a town called Sutter's Bend, and then she would be going on where? Cole asked. She looked at him with gray eyes that were entirely steady. She said she hadn't fully decided yet. He showed her to the inn on Millhaven's Central Road, the one run by Margaret Voss, who had kept travelers since before Cole could remember, and who had the excellent quality of asking no questions that weren't necessary. Iris Calloway thanked him with a handshake that was firm and brief, and looked him directly in the eye the way that certain people do when they have decided that directness is simply more efficient than ceremony. He went back to the livery. He lit the evening lamp. He fed the horses their grain and checked the water and did every task he always did in the order he always did them. He thought about the almost. He thought about a woman with a rope and a broken wheel, who had not been waiting to be saved. He came by the inn the next morning, which he told himself was a normal thing to do, given that he had left without confirming the wagon was properly repaired. He was a responsible person. He was following up. It had nothing to do with the gray eyes, or the handshake, or the almost. Iris was in the front room of the inn with a cup of tea and a map spread across the table. and she was studying it with the focused, unhurried concentration of someone who does not make decisions carelessly. She looked up when he came in, and she did not seem surprised to see him, which for reasons he could not entirely explain unsettled him slightly. "Wheels holding fine," she said. "You do good work." He sat down across from her, which he had not planned to do. Margaret appeared briefly, set a second cup on the table without being asked, and vanished back into the kitchen. Cole picked up the cup. "Are you from here?" Iris asked. Not because she seemed particularly interested in the answer, but the way people ask questions when they are gathering information about a place. "Born and raised," he said. She looked at the map. "What is it like?" He thought about that. He was not accustomed to people asking him what things were like. People in Millhaven mostly knew what things were like, and people passing through mostly didn't ask. "Quet," he said. "Reliable, hard winters." She nodded slowly, as if he had said something more interesting than he thought he had. She asked 3 more questions about the road north and the state of the pass in October, and whether Sutter's Bend was likely to have a farrier worth trusting. He answered all of them with the precision she appeared to prefer. She thanked him and returned to the map. He stayed for 20 minutes longer than he had intended to. When he left, he was not entirely sure why. The letter to Sutter's Bend, it turned out, could not be delivered. The pass road had washed out overnight from the rain, and the eastern trail was impassable until the drainage cleared, which would take a week at minimum. Cole heard this from old Jim Pratt at the road office on Wednesday morning, and found himself walking toward the inn with the information before he had decided to. Iris received the news with the same expression she seemed to receive most things. A moment of stillness, a brief recalculation. "All right," she said. "I'll stay until the road clears." She was a woman who adapted quickly, he noticed. Not in the way of someone passive, not simply bending to circumstance, but with the active, purposeful quality of someone who decided how they were going to relate to a situation, and then proceeded accordingly. By Thursday, she had negotiated with Margaret Voss to help with the accounts in exchange for a reduced rate. By Friday, she had made herself useful enough at Elwood's general store that Elwood had asked if she had any interest in continuing arrangement beyond the week. Cole learned these things in the small, accumulated way of a small town. Through Elwood mentioning it and Margaret mentioning it, and occasionally through direct observation when he passed the store and saw Iris through the window, working with the same focused competence she appeared to bring to everything. He stopped in at the store on Saturday, which he did regularly and which was therefore not an unusual thing to do. Iris was restacking a shelf of glass jars in the back with the particular efficiency of someone who is used to organizing things under circumstances where organization is a survival skill. He bought 2 things he did not need and exchanged approximately 4 sentences with Elwood and then stood for a moment at the back of the store. She glanced over at him, a sideways look brief. "The road still closed?" she asked. "As of this morning," he said. "Should be clear by Wednesday." She returned her attention to the jars. He went home and thought about why he had come in. It was Margaret Voss who said what the town was thinking. She said it in the direct, unadorned way that Margaret said most things. On a Monday evening when Cole had stopped by the inn to repair a broken hinge on the front gate, which she had asked him about, and which was therefore a perfectly reasonable visit. "She's not what people think she is," Margaret said. Without preamble and without looking up from the pea she was shelling on the porch, Cole looked at the hinge. "What do people think she is?" Margaret's hands kept moving. A drifter, someone between things. Someone without roots or connections. "She's traveling," Cole said. "That's not the same as having nothing." "No," Margaret agreed. "It certainly is not." She shelled 3 more peas. "She's a careful person," she added. "Careful and private. I've housed enough travelers to know the difference between those who hide something and those who've learned that privacy is earned, not assumed. Iris Calloway is the second kind." Cole set down the hinge. He didn't say anything. Margaret looked at him finally. "She reads the room before she trusts it," Margaret said. "Same as you." He went home and thought about that for a long time. The Wednesday came, and the road opened, and Cole told himself that was the end of it. Iris Calloway would deliver her letter and continue north, and Millhaven Crossing would go on being reliable and quiet and hard-wintered, and that was as it should be. He was not a man who wanted more than what he had. He had decided that carefully years ago, and he had stood by the decision with the same thoroughness he brought to everything. On Wednesday morning, he saw her wagon loaded in front of the inn, with everything strapped down neatly, and the horse brushed and ready, and Iris standing beside it, talking to Margaret, who was pressing a paper package of food into her hands with the particular firmness of a woman who does not accept refusals. Cole watched from across the road. He had nothing to do on this side of the road. He had come here specifically and was now standing here specifically, and that was a thing he did not examine. Iris saw him. She said something final to Margaret, and walked across the road with her hands in her coat pockets and her steady gray eyes finding him without difficulty. "Road's clear," he said. She nodded. She looked at him the way she looked at the map that first morning, like she was measuring something. Then she said, "You've been by the store 3 times this week." He held her gaze. He was not accustomed to being read clearly. Most people in Millhaven read him as closed, as solid, as present but opaque. She had apparently seen through that without particular effort. "I have," he said. She considered that for a moment. The town was doing its quiet morning things around them. A cart going past, someone opening a shutter above the bakery. Smoke beginning to rise from chimneys in the cool air. "Is there something you wanted to say, Cole?" she asked. She used his name the way she used all things, without decoration, but he felt it the same way. He thought about the almost. About a woman who had been in the process of solving her own problem. About gray eyes doing a rapid and thorough assessment and deciding that yes, this new development might help. About 20 years of building exactly the life he had chosen, and the particular loneliness that existed inside a chosen life when you had chosen it too carefully. "I'd like to know where you're going," he said. "After Sutter's Bend, after North. I'd like to know what you're heading toward." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "Because I think I'd like to know how to find it," he said. If a person wanted to, the silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Iris Calloway looked at him for a long moment with those measuring, steady eyes. Something shifted in her expression. Not dramatically, not sentimentally, more like a door that had been built for cold weather and had been kept properly shut for a long time, opening a careful inch. "I haven't decided yet," she said, "where I'm going after. I've been traveling for 2 years and I haven't found a reason to stop." He waited. She seemed to be deciding something. She looked down the road toward the pass, then back at him. "Millhaven is quieter than I expected," she said. "The road is good. The winters are hard. But I know hard winters." He said nothing. He waited the way he had learned that certain things required waiting. She looked at him again, really looked, with the same directness she had given him at the wheel in the rain when she was deciding whether he was going to be useful or complicated. "I'll be back through in a week," she said, "when I've delivered the letter. If you still want to show me the North Ridge Trail you mentioned, I'll be here for it." He had not mentioned a North Ridge Trail. She knew that. He knew she knew that. It was an offering of the most practical kind, a door held open without theater, a chance given without pressure. He recognized it for what it was. "All right," he said. "I'll be here." She walked back to her wagon. She climbed up, settled the reins, and drove out through Millhaven without looking back, which he was beginning to understand was not coldness, but simply the way she moved through the world. Forward, eyes on the road. Trusting that what she'd left behind was worth returning to, he stood on the side of the road for a moment after the wagon had gone. A few people passed. Nobody commented. The morning went on in its reliable, quiet way. He went back to the livery and lit the lamp and checked the horses, and did every task he always did. But his mind was on a road going north, and a woman with gray eyes and a broken wheel. She had almost fixed herself, and he thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what it might feel like to make a room for something he hadn't planned on. She came back on the 8th day. He knew she would. He had not allowed himself to know it with any certainty until the moment the wagon came down the south road, and he saw it from the livery door. The horse he recognized, the neat way the canvas was tied, the particular uprightness of the woman holding the reins. He walked out to meet her without hurrying. She pulled up in front of the livery and looked down at him with the same measuring assessment, and then a small, unhurried thing crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the relative of one. "You're here," she said. "I said I would be," he said. She handed him the reins and climbed down. She was wearing the same coat as before. She looked tired in the way people look tired when they have been moving for a long time and have briefly stopped. He led the horse inside and gave it water and hay, while Iris stood in the livery doorway and looked at the space with the same methodical interest she brought to everything. Reading it, assessing it, placing herself in relation to it. "You built this," she said. "It wasn't a question. My father started it. I finished it." He gestured at the particular corner where the construction style changed. There was a seam in the wood where one era ended and another began, visible if you looked carefully. She had looked carefully. She turned and looked at him instead. He stayed where he was. He was beginning to understand that the space she needed was not a distance but a quality. Unhurried, undemanding, room to make her own assessments. "Tell me about the North Ridge," she said. He told her. They walked it the following Sunday, up through the trees where the trail turned steep and the valley spread out below in the autumn light, like a thing that had been waiting to be seen. She walked without complaint and without slowing, and asked exactly the kind of questions a person asks when they are thinking about a place, rather than simply moving through it. "What grows here in spring?" she asked, told her. She listened the way she listened to everything, with the particular quality of a person who is storing information for a purpose she has not yet disclosed. On the way back down, she said, almost casually, as if the thought were arriving naturally, rather than having been held for some time. "I've been looking for somewhere I chose, rather than somewhere I ended up." He thought about that. He watched the path. "Is there a difference?" he asked. She looked at him. For a long moment. "Yes," she said. "There's all the difference." He didn't ask what she meant. He understood what she meant. By November, she had a room at Margaret's and 3 days of work per week at Elwood's shop and a reputation in Millhaven as a person who was precise and fair, and did not trade in small talk. People respected her the way they respected things that made sense on their own terms. Cole came by the shop on Tuesdays, and sometimes on Thursdays. They had supper at the inn on Saturdays, which had become a thing, without either of them formally naming it as a thing. He found he looked forward to it with an intensity that was new to him, not the anxious forward-looking of a man waiting for something to go wrong, but something quieter and more unfamiliar. Anticipation, he thought. That was what it was. In December, she told him that the letter she had delivered in Sutter's Bend had been to a lawyer, settling a property dispute over land her late father had left in contested will. The land had been awarded to her. She had not been looking for it. It had found her anyway. He looked at her across the supper table. "What will you do with it?" She was quiet for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I sold it," she said. "The land is in a place I left. I sold it, and I have what that is worth, and I have no further business in Sutter's Bend." Something in the way she said it. He thought about a woman with a rope and a broken wheel. A woman who had been solving her own problem. A woman who had 2 years of roads behind her and had called Millhaven quieter than she expected. "Is that what brought you through?" he asked. "The letter." She met his eyes. "Yes," she said, and then she said, "I'm glad the road washed out. The winter in Millhaven that year was hard. He had promised it would be. The mountain road closed for 3 weeks in January, and the town turned inward the way it did, drawing to itself, neighbors checking on neighbors. The particular warmth of a place that has survived many winters, knowing how to survive this one. Iris Calloway was not a woman who needed checking on. She had food stored and wood enough, and the sensible self-sufficiency of a person who had been managing for themselves for a long time. But she started appearing at the livery on Tuesday mornings to help with the feeding rounds, which she claimed was because she liked the horses, and which Cole did not question because it was true, and also because it meant she was there. One Tuesday in January, while they were working in the comfortable quiet that had become the natural state between them. Iris said, without looking up from the water bucket she was filling, "You've never asked me where I was before." He knew what she meant. Before the South Road and the wagon and the broken wheel, before 2 years of traveling, the place or circumstances she had left. "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He continued with the hay. "My husband died," she said, 4 years ago. He was a good man, and it was a sudden thing, and for a long time after, the house and the town and every road I knew felt like they were made of the wrong material. Like everything was slightly wrong." She paused. "So I left. I thought movement would fix it, and then I thought nothing would fix it. And then one day, somewhere in the 2nd year, I realized I wasn't broken anymore. I was just in motion." He stopped what he was doing. He set the hay down. She looked at him directly. "I'm not looking for a replacement," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not trying to reconstruct anything. I'm just telling you where I came from so you know who you're talking to." He thought about what to say. He considered it with the same care he brought to things that mattered. "I'm not looking to be anyone's replacement either," he said, "and I don't need the before to make sense of the now." She looked at him for a long time. Something settled in her face. Not softened, exactly. Settled. The way a structure settles when it has been properly built. "Good," she said. She picked up the bucket again. He picked up the hay. They continued down the row of stalls in the comfortable quiet. In February, he told her about his former partner who had taken the South pasture land in a dissolution that the town still talked about in coded language, and she received the information without pity and without drama, and said simply that it seemed like a hard thing, and asked one practical question about whether the pasture had been recovered, and when he said yes, she nodded like a case had been properly closed. He appreciated that more than he could easily say. It was March when he finally understood what he had been understanding slowly for months. He was repairing the fence at the north edge of his property, which backed against the tree line, when he looked up and saw her coming up the hill path from town, her coat buttoned against the cold, her breath making small clouds, picking her way through the last of the mud with the practical attention she gave to terrain. She had not told him she was coming. He had not known. She had simply decided to, and here she was. She arrived at the fence and looked at his work and said, "You missed a post back there," and pointed. He looked. She was right. They worked on the fence for 2 hours without much conversation. She held boards while he drove nails. She went back for the post he had missed and positioned it correctly while he mixed the setting material. They worked with the ease of people who have found the particular rhythm of sharing a task. When they finished, she looked out at the valley below, the town visible in its cup of hills, smoke from chimneys, the glint of the creek. "It's a good view," she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Elwood's offer," she said, the permanent position he waited. She turned and looked at him. "If I stay," she said, "I want to stay the way I decide to stay, not the way I drifted in." He understood the distinction precisely. "That's the only way it would make sense," he said. She looked at the valley for another moment. Then she said quietly, more to the view than to him, "I think I've been looking for a place that felt chosen rather than arrived at." He said nothing. He waited. She turned back and looked at him. "And I think the wheel didn't break by accident," she said. "Not literally, I know it broke literally, but—" She stopped. He understood what she meant. "I think you'd almost had it," he said. The wheel, she looked at him. The expression that crossed her face was new. Something opening, not all at once, not with any performance, the way a window opens in early spring when the weather has finally decided. "I almost had it," she agreed. "And then you came along." He said what needed saying, which was not a great deal, but which was the right amount. He said that he had come out of the ditch into a life more interesting than the one he had been building, and that he was in favor of continuing that. He said it in the plain, economical way. He said things without decoration, because she had shown him from the beginning that decoration was not required. She stood in the March wind on the North Ridge fence line, and she looked at him the way she had looked at the wagon wheel in the rain. taking the measure of a thing, determining whether it was sound. "All right," she said. She accepted Elwood's offer the following week. She took a room above the store, which she made efficient and organized and entirely her own, belonging to no one's charity. Cole came to supper on Saturdays and stayed longer than he used to, and on Sundays they walked, sometimes up toward the North Ridge, sometimes along the creek road where the new grass was coming in green. She told him things slowly, the way she did everything, in careful, measured amounts, never more than had been earned. He did the same. They did not rush the accounting. There was something serious and precise about the way they were building a thing, like two people who had learned the cost of poor construction and were determined to do it correctly. In June, she told him about her mother, who had been a botanist in a small way, who had known the name of every growing thing in 3 counties, who had given Iris the habit of looking carefully at whatever she moved through. He told her about the winter his father died, the year he had been 22, when he had become the kind of man who shows up because there was no one else left to show up, and the habit had stayed. She received that without pity. She said simply that it had made him reliable in ways that were not small. He had not thought of it that way. He considered it for several days afterward and thought she was probably right. He asked her in August. They were on the North Ridge at the end of a Sunday walk, the valley gold below them in the late summer light, the air beginning to cool with the first suggestion of autumn. He asked her the way he asked most things, directly and without preamble, because she had shown him early that she preferred it. "I'd like to make this permanent," he said. "The Saturdays and the walks and all of it. I'd like you to know that this is where I want to be, and that I would like, if you are willing, for you to be in it." She looked at him. She was quiet for a moment in the measuring way, and he let her be quiet. "Is this you asking me to marry you?" she said. "It is," he said. "Probably not elegantly." "No," she agreed. But clearly, that was sufficient for both of them. She said yes the way she said most things, without performance, with the direct, settled quality of a person who had thought it through and arrived at a conclusion she trusted. She held out her hand and he took it, and they stood on the ridge, while the light went gold and then amber and the valley below them did its quiet evening settling. They married in October, when the aspens had gone yellow and the mountain road was still passable and the air had the particular clean quality of Mill Haven autumn. Margaret Voss was there. Elwood was there. Jim Pratt from the road office came and stood in the back with his hat in his hands. The people of Mill Haven came because it was the right thing to do, and because something about the two of them together had the quality of a thing that made sense, that had been built correctly, that was going to last. Cole did not know, until the morning of the wedding, that Iris Calloway was not traveling without connections in the way the town had assumed. He found out not dramatically, not as a revelation with consequences, but quietly the way Iris did everything. Her family name, she told him, while they were walking to the ceremony, was not simply Calloway. She was the daughter of James Calloway of the Calloway Land Holdings, which comprised the better part of 4 counties south of the mountain range, which had been in her family for 3 generations, which she had left deliberately and entirely at 28, when her father had tried to make her life a transaction, and to which she had no intention of returning. She had traveled 2 years with a broken wheel and a canvas bag and a letter for a lawyer, and she had arrived in Mill Haven in the rain, and she had stood in the ditch with a rope and almost had it. Cole stood on the road and looked at her. She met his eyes directly. "Does it change anything?" she asked. He thought about it. He thought about a woman holding a rope in the rain. He thought about gray eyes doing a rapid assessment and deciding that yes, this was going to be useful. He thought about the North Ridge fence, and the fence post he had missed, and the steady, practical way she had corrected him. "No," he said. "Not a thing." She looked at him with an expression he had come to know well by then, measuring and steady, and, beneath both of those, something that had been carefully kept, and was now finally safely set down. "Good," she said. She took his arm. They went to be married. Iris kept working at Elwood's. Cole kept the livery. The livery expanded eventually. with a new section on the north end that Iris had suggested the logistics of, and which Cole had built to her exact specifications, because they were correct. Douglas Calloway, her brother who had attempted the transaction, wrote once. She read the letter in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, with her tea and her straight back and her steady gray eyes, and when she had finished she folded it precisely and set it on the table. "He wants to reconcile," she said. Cole was at the stove. He waited. "I'll write back," she said, "on my terms. When I'm ready." "All right," he said. She picked up her tea. He went back to the stove. Out the window, Mill Haven Crossing was going about its morning, reliable and quiet, in the way of a place that has learned to be steady through its winters. 3 years later, on an October morning with the aspens gold again, and the valley doing its best impression of a place that had always been beautiful and intended to continue, Iris came to the livery door while Cole was doing the morning rounds and told him that the livery was going to need a smaller stall, eventually. He turned and looked at her. She looked back at him with those gray eyes, steady and direct and carrying, now, the particular warmth of a person who has finally arrived somewhere, and knows it. He crossed the livery floor and held her face in his hands carefully, the way he handled things that mattered, and she laughed. For the first time he heard her laugh, really laugh, free and unguarded and entirely out of her control. He felt it like a wheel turning over, like a road opening after a long winter, like a thing beginning. And that is where we leave Cole Dressler and Iris Calloway on an October morning in Mill Haven Crossing, at the start of what comes next. If stories about quiet people building something real are what bring you back, there are more here waiting. And wherever in the world you're reading this from, a quiet town or a busy city, a warm place or a cold one, drop it in the comments. It means more than you know to see how far a simple story can reach.